Thank you, Senator. Dr. Burgess?
Yeah, we've noticed they don't vote often in the Senate. Sorry, I couldn't resist. Let me just ask a question because it's the point of some discussion. The Speaker gave a speech yesterday to the Pete Peterson Foundation and talked about the fact that we all knew December of this year was likely to be a pretty dreadful month. And it is his opinion that we ought to move things out of the so-called lame duck session and tackle those problems during the time that we have left between now and the election. And I agree with him. I may not agree with everything that he outlined, and I rather suspect our panelists don't agree with everything that he outlined. But fundamentally, do you think that is a more coherent approach to the problems that face this country, what with the expiration of existing tax policy, the Bush-Obama tax cuts, the possibility of facing another debt limit crisis toward the end of the year? Should we move this forward and get it done during the summer or during the early fall? And I'd appreciate an answer from each of you. Yes, Dr. Rogerson, we'll start with you and then move down.
Okay. I mean, my view on that issue is I believe uncertainty is bad for the economy. And so when there are important decisions to be made, rather than let them sit and people be worried about what may happen, I think it's important to take action. So from that perspective, taking action sooner and so that individuals and businesses can understand what they're going to be working with moving forward, I think that makes good sense.
All right. It's not like these things aren't going to happen. Dr. Biggs?
I agree with Professor Rogerson regarding uncertainty. And I think I would just add that I'm not an expert on the political process, but it strikes me that the longer people from both parties have time to consider the sorts of choices and the sorts of compromises they might have to make, the more likely it is that an agreement can be come upon. So beginning today and talking as much as you can today, I think was more likely to produce a good outcome than pushing it all to December and then trying to rush it through at the end.
Well, that's typically what we've done. Dr. Johnson?
I think it depends on what sort of deal you think you could come up with in the near term, Dr. Burgess. If revenue's on the table, if you have a balanced approach to bringing the debt under control, this would amazingly shock and impress world financial markets, and you would substantially remove the risk of a fiscal crisis in this country for the foreseeable future. But if revenue is completely off the table, if this kind of debate would just reaffirm that one part of the political spectrum will not compromise or change its view with regard to tax rates and bolstering revenue, then I fear that the financial markets may take that adversely. So you would resolve the uncertainty, to be sure, but resolve it in a negative direction with regard to medium-term fiscal sustainability.
Let me just ask you a question, Dr. Johnson. In your testimony, you said that the expiration of existing tax policy would be desirable. Now, when the President talks about it, he talks about preserving existing tax policy for people who earn under $250,000 a year for a couple. Is it your view that the entire existing tax policy from 2001, 2003 needs to go away?
Yes, what's exactly our view is that the so-called Bush-era tax cuts, perhaps we should call them the Bush-Obama tax cuts now, should not be extended. And if you feel that the short-term effect on the economy would be too dramatic, I would propose that you replace that with a temporary payroll tax linked to employment relative to total population. So as employment recovers, the payroll tax would fade away. That's a way to offset the if you want to be Keynesian about it, and I don't particularly urge a Keynesian perspective here, but if you want to take a Keynesian perspective, then you could replace the effects of those expiring tax cuts with the temporary payroll tax cut linked to a rule.
Well, suffice to say, we're not going to come to a conclusion today, but I appreciate all of your views on that. And this is something that, again, I'm glad the Speaker brought it up because we do need to face it, although it may be politically unpalatable to do so before Election Day. It needs to happen. I'll yield back, Mr. Chair.